Safety Seminar on the Sun and Fun Complex at Lakeland, Florida. Coming to you live from the 2014 Sun and Fun Fly-In. For over 16 years, we have been bringing the aviation safety message to you via seminars, workshops, and videos using our aviation safety team representatives, which means our production crew is made up of almost entirely of volunteers, giving their time to support aviation safety. After today's presentation, please take the time to thank our stage and floor and crew for their time and efforts. Our next presenters will be talking on FAA safety stand-down, pilot-induced airworthiness, and operational safety failures. At this time, I'd like to present your presenters, the FAA Safety Program Managers from the Southern Region. Let's welcome Mark Laughridge and Fred Kaiser.
Thank you, Vicki.
You're very welcome, Mark.
And thank you all for coming. I am the FAASTeam Program Manager at the Orlando FSDO. And let me get our show pulled up here. There we go. She mentioned sort of a different title, but airworthiness issues. Everything has a start, and one of the starts to when we go flying is we have to make airworthiness determinations, and we do that through our pre-flight process. Well, what I'm going to do is give you some results from previous years of Project Pre-Flight that we accomplished here at Sun and Fun. It was something we've done every year for many years. We weren't able to the last couple of years, but I've got the results from 2012, and they're quite striking. So, first, I like to show you this. I love chicken wings, great comic strip, but this one sort of brings home the point that there is a difference between the way some people pre-flight an airplane and the way other ones do. For instance, in this case, pilots and mechanics. And I actually started off as a mechanic prior to being a pilot, so I look at things a little differently. And in the end here, you can see where the pilot's thinking, oh, mechanics, and the mechanic is thinking, oh, pilots. So obviously a different understanding of pre-flight. Now, some quotes that you would never want associated with yourself. Unfortunately, when things don't go right, we can have accidents and incidents. Well, before you are going to be quotes from the NTSB, which means that there was an accident, or the NTSB doesn't even get involved. So the first quote is, the pilot's improper pre-flight inspection resulted in total loss of engine power due to fuel exhaustion. Now that, unfortunately, is a more common incident than we'd like to see. But how do you do that? How do you run out of fuel? We don't usually do that in our car. Occasionally we do, but in an airplane it seems to be somewhat more common. Had the pilot gone back and looked at, okay, my flight is going to take 3.5 hours, do I have enough fuel for not only 3.5 hours, but the regulations call for a reserve? Do I have that amount of reserve? Do I have, for instance, headwinds that may not be forecast? Or do I need to land someplace before where I intended to and get fuel? Sometimes you have to make unintended stops. This next one was contributing to the accident was the pilot's failure to perform a thorough pre-flight inspection. That contributed to an accident. That contributed to, and I don't recall on this one whether there was a fatality or not, but there have been many fatalities where it goes back to an improper pre-flight. The pilot's inadequate post-maintenance and pre-flight inspections resulted in the separation of the left main wheel after takeoff. That's definitely something you don't want to happen. Had he inspected that aircraft a little more closely after maintenance, he should have been able to see if there was a problem with that left main wheel. Now granted, Maintenance should have also been able to catch that. That should have never left the shop, obviously without the, not sure exactly what, but the main nut or whatever was holding that wheel on. But again, that pilot, his last chance is that pre-flight before he goes flying, because as you know, we'd much rather be on the ground wishing we were up there than up there wishing we were down here. The pilot's inadequate pre-flight planning resulted in the airplane's loading beyond its maximum gross weight. They overloaded the airplane. What happens here a lot of times, not only is it overloaded, but it could be, we could have an aft CG situation where the aircraft may or may not be controllable in flight. There are actually some aircraft that, depending on the design of the aircraft, as they fly, as they burn off fuel, the CG will move. And one of the ones that comes to mind is the Beechcraft Bonanza. Very nice, fast airplane, but as you burn off fuel, that CG moves aft. And as it moves aft, depending on where you've got baggage and people in the aircraft, you could end up with an aft CG problem. So that's another area that has cropped up. Failure of both pilots. So here we had two pilots on board to ensure that no water was present in the fuel. Now, I believe on this one, this was actually a training flight where there was a flight instructor and a student. Well, we're not sure, did the flight instructor instruct his student to go out, do the pre-flight, do the drain the fuel, or was he actually there when that was accomplished? And we try to encourage the local flight schools here you need to keep an eye on them, because they're still learning this. And if there's something that is not being accomplished like it should be, there's your opportunity to stop it, to nip it in the bud right there. But the NTSB in this case pointed the finger at both pilots for not thoroughly pre-flighting that aircraft and making sure that all water was out of the system prior to flying. The pilot's inadequate pre-flight inspection resulted in the in-flight opening of an engine cowling. We've also seen, I've known of other ones where there were baggage doors came open. And unfortunately, with the way the airflow flows around the aircraft, sometimes that will actually suck things out of a baggage area, which, depending on its proximity to the engines, the tail of the aircraft, it could do other damage to the aircraft. Obviously, this one was enough to where it caused an accident. I don't know if they lost control after it or what, but now we've talked about 6 items here. To get these items, I went into the NTSB reports, and I went to 1 week. Now, these were scattered all over the country, but I went to 1 week, and actually, I couldn't get them all on this slide. There were more accidents that happened in 1 week dealing with pre-flight, lack of proper pre-flight, than I could get on one slide. So that tells us something that this is a bigger issue than maybe what we would normally think. We think of accidents happening because of possibly mechanical, which there are actually very few that happen because of mechanical issues, or pilot error, which accounts for over 80% of all accidents. But this next slide, these are the results from Sun and Fun 2012, where we see multiple bars here, both red and blue. Well, the legend on this is that blue is good, red are misses. The blue ones people found the problems, and the problems are listed across the bottom here, indicating what we had done to the aircraft. In Project Pre-Flight, we would take usually a Cessna 172 or other aircraft that was donated to us for the event, and we would put about 10 problems on that aircraft to see if pilots could catch that. Well, here are a list of problems that we'd put on the aircraft that week, and here are the results. Now, one of the things we do with Project Pre-Flight is we will provide the person with everything they need to do a complete pre-flight. Copies of the POH, which provide the checklist, the status of the aircraft regarding inspections, ADs, everything that's needed for a pilot to make a complete and proper pre-flight on that aircraft. Now, this has nothing to do with weather or any of that, but this is strictly on the aircraft. And we were quite taken by this. Actually, in previous years, we knew there were problems and issues in this area, but we'd never documented them like we did this year. One of the areas that I'd like to point out is, let's see, I believe it's the fifth one over from the left there, is FOD blocking the carburetor filter. Well, this was on a 172 that was basically overall white with some striping, but the front of the cowling was all white. And as we were walking around, I actually took a piece of paper, folded it up, and it fit just in front of the carburetor. Normally something you wouldn't see, but just to see if people caught that. Well, as you see, that 52 missed, 21 found it. Only 21 people found that. Actually, we had a couple bring it back to us, said, hey, somebody stuck this up in front of the airplane, but 52 didn't, and didn't write it down. Now, in doing Project Pre-Flight, we would have people with absolutely no aviation experience, no aviation background, other than possibly having been a passenger, all the way up to people that hold flight instructor certificates and also airline transport pilot certificates. So you would think if anyone could do a good pre-flight, it would be them, right? Well, guess who did the best? Guess who did the best? Non-pilots, or those with very little time, that took this very seriously. The ones that did the worst were the pilots you would think that would do the best, the CFIs, the ATPs. One of the first things they would do was we would give them a piece of paper that had 10 items here, and they were to describe what they found. And they would take the checklist we gave them, stick it up under that, never to look at it during the whole operation. So that told us, one, is that they don't think much of pre-flighting, that they must know it all, so they don't need the checklist. But also, when we're on board the aircraft, pilots are supposed to use the checklist, right? Well, why not use it before, too, to catch those problems that when it says check for this and it's different than that, you found a problem. But unfortunately, that was the case. The most glaring were actually two flight instructors that did the pre-flight at the same time. One got 6 out of 10. One only got 5 out of 10. Now the ones that they missed, they actually wrote nothing down because they said they couldn't find anything. And as you see, there was plenty to find. When we went around and pointed out some of these problems and issues that we had, some of the responses were, well, I was never taught to look at that. Another response was, that's a problem? So here we have a lack of understanding that they were never taught right. Well, now here we have a flight instructor. Now, how far back did this go? Was it only with their flight instructor failed to teach them, or did that flight instructor not understand it as well? So this actually goes back multiple generations. And we feel like if we could ever get one good generation, especially of flight instructors, to then forevermore teach their students the right way, then the next generation, they should have it. They should not have that or not know what to look for. They should always be up to speed on that. I've also included, and we're going to do a little comparison between a couple of models of the Cessna. One is the Cessna N model, which was the Cessna, the N and the P model, which was one of the last produced by Cessna back in the 80s, early 80s. There was about a 10-year gap between there and when they started producing the 172 again, and I believe it was the mid-90s. The first one back was the R model. But at any rate, what we've got here was, let's look and see how long this checklist is. This, of course, starts and gives us a map of how to follow it around. Here we've got right over to number 8 there on the left-hand side. So we've got about a page, not quite a page and a half, of items to check for. Well, let's go back and look at, for instance, the cabin area, number 1. They have 7 items there to look at. Well, now let's move forward and look at when Cessna started producing the 172 again, how many items are now in the cabin? All right, Here's the 172R. We see, all right, there's the first 7. Then there's a warning there about turning on the master switch with external power connected. But then we start on 8. We've got 14 on that page. And on the next page, we have all the way down to 22. That's 3 times the number of things to check for. And basically all Cessna did was they quit building the airplane and they started building it again. And granted, there are a couple of more things to check, but I think Cessna came to realize as well is that, no, there's a lot more to check. But if you were taught how to pre-flight back in the old days, let's say, back with the N model 172 or before, you had a very abbreviated checklist to follow versus the new one. And what we're finding is that people revert to their old ways. They revert back to what they were originally taught. In fact, we refer to that as the law of primacy, that you're going to revert back to that thing you first learned. And you have to understand that aircraft change. For instance, as over its lifetime, aircraft may have new systems installed, especially with the new avionics systems today. Those will require additional items to the checklist. And we'll find that in the supplements back in the back of the handbook. Now, unfortunately, a lot of pilots don't understand that, so they don't refer back to those supplements to understand what they need to check before they take that flight. Now we noticed earlier in the N model that the complete checklist was not quite a page and a half. Well, let's see what this one is. We started off here on this page on 4.7. There's 4.9. All the way to 4.11. So there's a good bit more to check on the R model. And actually, you can probably look through this and go, yeah, these are some areas that should have been checked all along. One of the first ones that caught my eye were the coming around here on on the ring, number 3 there, to check the aileron, but also the flap, check for security and conditions. And they also call for, up in the cabin area, to extend the flaps. Well, that was never done before. That was one of those areas. And so you wouldn't know if you didn't follow that, you didn't lower the flaps, if there might possibly be an issue with the flaps. Well, the next thing I want to show you is this checklist. Now, each of you should have received a copy when you came in today. This is a checklist that we put together at the Orlando FSDO, dealing with, it's a much expanded checklist for pilots to go by. And notice by each, there's a reference, federal regulation reference for what that applies to. Well, now we're familiar with the acronym ARROW, which dealt with the airworthiness certificate, the registration certificate, the operating limitations, and the weight and balance, which weight and balance is actually an operating limitation in itself. But notice we've expanded greatly on this. We also have the operator's license. Now, obviously, that's only applicable if we go out of the country or if it's a large aircraft. But the aircraft flight manual or pilot operating handbook, that's a requirement. That has to be not only in there but followed. There are some people that look at you can get an information manual. Well, that's not the same thing. It may have all the same information, but for one, I guarantee it doesn't have any of the supplements that you may very well need for that flight. Current status of all the applicable airworthiness directives. This is something that many pilots just really have little or no knowledge of airworthiness directives. And when an airworthiness directive comes out, they actually become part of a regulation, and they have to be complied with. There's no getting around them. Whereas with a 100-hour inspection, we can go 10 hours or 10% over. Can't do that with an AD. An AD has to be done exactly when it's called for. Inspection status, for instance, annual 100-hour inspections. These are things that need to be checked prior to flight. And actually, if you've got a flight coming up, these are things you would want to check days in advance to get this all out of the way. Your ELT, VOR equipment, if you're going to be going IFR, and really VFR as well. You want to make sure that you're using accurate equipment. Compass deviation card. What a lot of people don't realize about that little compass deviation card is that that's a certification requirement. Regardless how old that airplane is, whether it's a J3 Cub or it's a Boeing 747 or Airbus 380 as far as the largest aircraft, that's a requirement by the CARS, by Part 23, by Part 25. So if we don't have that compass deviation card, technically that aircraft is not airworthy. We're going to speak to airworthy, the definition of that here shortly, but that's a very important card. The system static inspection, pitot-static inspection, altimeter inspections, those have time requirements. You want to make sure that you're not flying the aircraft when the transponder, static altimeter have not been tested within their requirements. Current status of life-limited parts. Now, granted, a lot of these things are going to be things that your maintenance staff, the people who work on the aircraft, should have up to speed. But if we look back in Part 91, the FAA holds the pilot, owner-operator responsible to make sure that that's the case. Now, for instance, Form 337s for alterations or repairs. Well, why would that be important to a pilot? Well, for instance, if this is your first time with this aircraft and you're just getting to know it and you're going through the handbook, a lot of aircraft have alterations and repairs done on them that may not be addressed in the handbook, but it would be helpful for you to know prior to going. And what a 337 form does is that's a record of any major repair or alteration that's been done to that aircraft. And it may or may not affect your flight. Inoperative equipment. With larger aircraft, let's say the airlines, they utilize minimum equipment list. And this is something that allows certain items in the aircraft to be inoperative. Well, small aircraft typically don't use that. The reason being is there's a lot to deal with a minimum equipment list. Excuse me. You have to have approval to use that. So you have to have training. Everyone that flies the aircraft has to use that. So, hence, that's just a lot more effort. So, what do you do if something breaks? Well, 91-213, which talks about the inoperative equipment, also talks about MELs, is that we have to look to see if that aircraft could be flown without that equipment. In some cases, it's possible. For instance, if it was a landing light and this was a flight that was not for hire, it may be possible to fly without it. So we want to go back also into 91 to 91-205 that gives the minimum equipment. Also, we want to refer to the aircraft's type certificate data sheet. Now, the type certificate data sheet is issued when basically an airplane is born. And this tells the pilot, the owner, maintenance uses it much more than the pilots do, but about some of the required equipment on the aircraft, a lot of specifics on the aircraft are found in the type certificate data sheet. So that helps us determine whether or not that inoperative component can be done away with or not used that flight. Also, the equipment list on the aircraft. And many times they will have a little note out beside there as to whether or not it's a required item or it's an optional item. These are areas that need to be referenced. And this is something that we try to teach a lot of our CFIs, young CFIs that come through a program where they get a copy of this, that these are things that they need to not only know themselves, but then pass on to their students. And then finally here, the external data plate. And this was something that is required by 4511. And the external data plate, and I won't go into the details there, but when you're doing your pre-flight, make sure that there is one. And it has to be just after the pilot's door, and depending on the aircraft, it can be sometimes underneath the bottom back toward the tail. So that's something to check on. Now you've got a checklist to do it. So airworthy, what does that mean? And there are actually a lot of definitions. There are a lot of people that say, well, that means that the aircraft's been inspected and this and that, but there's an actual definition that states that it means the aircraft and its component parts meets the type design or properly altered configuration and is in condition for safe operation. That and is key because it has to not only meet the type design, which that type certificate data sheet addresses in a great deal. The actual type design itself is something that's proprietary paperwork that between the FAA and the operator. But so it's very easy to determine whether or not the aircraft is airworthy. You can also find that in a number of other areas. And FAR Part 21 lists that in several areas. Also, on the aircraft airworthiness certificate, if you'll look in Block 5, you'll see where some of that same verbiage is there, giving the pilot the understanding that airworthiness certificate is only effective as long as the aircraft is airworthy. So now you've got something that you can take with you, and you can make your own assessment as to whether or not the aircraft is airworthy, whether or not there's you need to look further, you need to get further guidance. But I'd like to invite up now my partner in this, Mr. Fred Kaiser. He's going to be talking about some of the ways to keep yourself from getting into problems. So I was wondering where that was.
Back here. Sorry.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. You know, Mark brings up some interesting stories, I guess. Well, I was going to try to work away from the mic, but I'll work behind the podium. I am the weakest link. Let's face it. If you're a pilot, you are the weakest link. We are. Let's face it, really, truly. Make no bones about it. When you look at your airplane, and as complex as that airplane is, and everything we have on that airplane is only as good as me, the weakest link. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. When we talk about pre-flight or pre-flight planning, it's all about you. It's all about me. It's all about how we approach this. And if we do not approach this in a mode of discipline, where we do it the same way time after time after time again, then you've lost it. There's another side of that called airmanship. That really doesn't apply until we get in the air, because now we're talking about the skills needed to fly an aircraft. And it does you absolutely no good to be the best pilot in the world if you cannot pre-flight. And, you know, I was sitting today writing down a few things about what I wanted to say. Now, 40 years, I've got over 40 years in aviation. I've got over 30,000 flight hours. I've been an ag pilot, Alaska bush pilot, commercial pilot, freight driver. Many times I've been a test pilot unwittingly in airplanes that I've flown. But all of that aside, all I want you to do today is pay attention. To use a phrase from the movie War of the Roses, Danny DeVito made a comment to a man. He said, quote, "When a lawyer that makes $800 an hour is willing to give you information for free, you should listen to him." And that's why we're all here today. We've been out here, we've made the mistakes, and there's a lot of things that I'm going to reiterate today that you just look at me and you say, "Hey, Fred, I know all that." And that's cool. But do you know it in here? Do you know it well enough to be your fail-safe so that you do it the same way time and time again? So what I did is I wrote up some stuff. And we're just going to highlight this. We don't have enough time to get into it. But this is, of course, being posted on FAASafety.gov, and you'll find it, and you can look at it. We're on the website, et cetera, et cetera. The first thing we look at is you all have heard the acronym I'm safe. Use it. Why? Because you are the weakest link. Do you feel good today? We talk about illness, medication, stress, alcohol, fatigue, and emotion. Use it. I use it. Every single thing on all these pages today came off of my personal checklist for pre-flight. Everything I'm going to share with you today is my deal breaker. I will perform every single thing on this list every single time I fly, bar none, period. No excuses. Nobody's going to interfere with me. I'm going to get it done, and I'm going to get it done right. So when we talk about I'm safe, take it serious. Don't even think about going flying if I'm safe is not working for you. The second thing I'm going to talk about is the one I really, really enjoy the most. It's called play the what-if game all the way through. Most people play the what-if game. Oh, they check the weather. Yeah, the weather's kind of marginal, but they say it's going to be improving, and hey, no problem. I got a piece of cake here. We've got it. Okay? Wrong answer, bachelor number one. This is why I want you to play the game. Yeah, weather said it's bad. Yeah, okay, well, let's see. What if I got there and the weather really was bad? What am I going to do? What are my escape routes? How is my plan going to be affected if I get there and all of a sudden I run into weather that's 400 foot obscured in light rain? How am I going to do that? What is my escape route? Is your plan just to die? Let's face it, CFIT accidents, major cause of pilot deaths. Come on. It's all about that, guys. Play the what-if game all the way through. Every single time you fly, play the what-if game. Back in my military training, my IP told me this. On a well-planned flight, there are no emergencies, merely a change in plans. So you have sat down, you have planned it out, you have worked it out, you've thought it out. Case in point, I'm going to backtrack 1 second. This came right out of an Air Force plan book. This is in a technical order for Air Force planning, mission planning. It says 1, planning, basic preparation of the pilot, briefing, evaluation, planning of route, briefing, evaluation, planning of route, attack, and other procedures. Number 2, pre-flight activities, inspections, checks, mission data, loading, and taxiing. Number 3, launch, takeoff, climb and cruise, including any sensor activation, setting, monitoring, checking of systems and displays. Number 4, ingress and egress. How am I leaving? How am I getting back? 5, attack. Plan the attack. How are we going to do it? 6, recovery. How are we going to get the heck out of there and get back? And 7, post-flight briefing. Now I'm going to put up a big one for you. How many of you, when you get back, tie the airplane down and do a walk around, looking for all the pieces that left the airplane while you were flying, or the bird that may have hit the airplane while you were flying? What I just read came from a mission planning guide for the United States Air Force. If it's good enough for those guys, why isn't it good enough for you? Why isn't it good enough for me? Why am I willing to set my standard any lower? Why? Why aren't I the professional? Why are not I the professional? Okay? Set my standard and do not deviate from that standard. Another thing, be the best you can be. You've heard that before. It's not a cliche. When people look at you, be the mentor and the person that they admire. Be the best you can be. When someone says he's a really good pilot, they're talking about you, because that's the respect you have of your peers. You do it the same way every single time with the same deal of finesse that you always have done it. Take the time to do it right. The one I like here is also, efficiency is not a shortcut. Don't do it fast. Do it well. Don't do it fast. Do it well. I'm not going to read all of those because there's a lot of them. But it all comes back to me. It all comes back to you. Many years flying up in Alaska, we fly in conditions that are sometimes intolerable. I've been caught in weather that I wouldn't drive a car in. Okay? Fortunately, I've been in an aircraft that was an all-weather night fighter. Basically, there were sections in my lifetime where I was the first airplane out in the morning because I was the weather probe. My job to go out and find out how bad the weather is and report it back to everybody else so we could launch the single-engine aircraft. Wow. So my comment to that is don't get good at a bad job, okay? Because basically I got the same job every single morning being the weather probe, and while I had a fully equipped IFR airplane, I even had IFR GPSs, which was way state-of-the-art, we still, for the most part, flew VFR. Okay, we're going to talk real quickly about a few elements of pre-flight. This is not all-inclusive. These are just the elements that are going to get you killed. Did you hear that? Okay. These are only the elements that are going to get you killed. That's a foot stomper. How do I know that? In my flying career, I've lost 28 of my friends in Alaska alone. Every single one of them died needlessly. You got that? Needlessly. They flew into weather conditions that were beyond their control and they crashed. Today, their acronym we use today is called CFIT, Controlled Flight into Terrain. What do I call it? If a pilot sees it, he doesn't hit it. They'd had no ground contact, or they would never have crashed. They died needlessly. So the first thing I want you to think about before you ever think about launching that airplane, do you have all your documents? And do you really know why they're all there? Okay? This isn't a test question. These documents are required documents by the FAA and whatever. No, they're required documents for common sense. Let's look at one of these things, an airworthiness certificate. Why in the world would you have an airworthiness certificate in an airplane? Because the FAA told me to. Duh. Have you ever looked at your certificate? What does it say on there? How about standard or normal or aerobatic or restricted categories, utility categories? What do those mean to you? Have you ever looked at your certificate to say November 457 Echo Juliet? November, let's see, that's November 457 Echo Juliet, November 369er Whiskey. That's good enough. And put it back in. See this right here? I'm working for the FAA. You will not believe the number of times I walked up to an airplane, looked at a document, and guess what? It's either not there or they've got the wrong N number on it. Well, I must have got mixed up in the shuffle, okay? Well, you know, things happen. No, take the time to do it right. These documents are here for your survival, okay? If someone says, hey, I want to go out, let's go do aerobatics on my 150. Cool. What's the first thing you're going to do? Look at the airworthiness certificate. Does it say normal, utility, or aerobatic? Pay attention. There's a reason for that. And if you don't know what those are, now is not the time to be learning them. Okay? Go find out. You got a registration certificate, you got a pilot's operating manual. Here's another one. It is not a joke, folks. It's not a joke. All right? It's there for a reason. Don't throw it in the back end of the airplane somewhere. Keep it up front where you can access it. Okay? This isn't a test question. This is an opportunity for you to grab something and learn something with it. Okay? There are certain items on a checklist that have to be memory items, and we know that. Okay, like shutting off their fuel in the fire and doing all this stuff. But then you consult the manual. Okay? It's okay to pull this thing out of there. What do you think the guys driving 747s and 737s do? That's what they do. That's what they're trained to do. You've got emergency items, you've got memory items, and then you call for the checklist. And that's what they do. They grab the manual out and start looking at it. If it's good enough for those guys, why isn't it good enough for us? Or worse yet, you stick the manual in the seat back. Folks, that's not going to help you in the seat back. You're going to unstrap yourself, get yourself turned around on the seat and find it. Oh, I'm going to put it in this seat back. Okay, do yourself. And this really aggravates me. Weight and balance data. Why? Because I'm going to bet a dollar bill to a donut the last weight and balance you did on your airplane was with a check airman or a CFI or someone that asked you to do it. Why? You don't have to do weight and balance. We know how we're loading the airplane, no big deal. Okay? Please take the time to do a weight and balance. Please, just for me, humor me, take the time, please. I don't ever want to see a statistic where an aircraft took off again and the aircraft flew basically one of these approaches, fell off, and spun right back into the earth.